If you've come across Shilajit recently, you've probably seen some pretty bold claims. Energy, focus, testosterone support, longevity. It gets framed as doing a lot of things all at once. And usually when something is described that broadly, it's worth slowing down and asking a different question. Not just does it work, but what does it actually mean in a real person? Here's what most of those conversations skip. Shilajit isn't a single compound. It works in more than one place at once, and whether you feel anything from it depends on a lot of what's already happening inside of your body's terrain. I'm Dr. Kenny, root cause health detective and a functional medicine practitioner, and instead of sorting this out from a distance and looking at the research, I tried it. I paid close attention to what changed along the way and what didn't for me, and I pulled the research to understand the mechanisms behind what I was noticing. So let's walk through what Shilajit actually is, where the claims do seem to hold up, and where I think a little more caution or context is needed along the way. All right, so let's start with the basics, because the origin story here is genuinely interesting, and it matters for understanding why the substance does what it does. Shilajit is a resin. It forms over centuries in the tiny crevices of high altitude mountain ranges, primarily the Himalayas, as plant matter and organic materials slowly decompose and get compressed between layers of rock. Pretty cool. What seeps out is a dense tar-like substance that concentrates both organic compounds and minerals from the surrounding geology and rocks. This is not a simple supplement by any means. In fact, modern analysis shows that Shilajit contains over 40 trace minerals alongside two primary active compound families. The first is fulvic acid, which typically makes up to 60 to 80% of the bioactive chemical compounds of Shilajit. Fulvic acid is a carrier molecule, meaning that it helps to transport minerals and nutrients across our cell membranes and boundaries and into your tissues. The second is a class of compounds called dibenzo-alpha-pyrones, or DBPs. These are molecules that are most directly involved in energy production at the cellular level. This combination is why Shilajit gets described as doing many things at once across multiple systems. It's not that the claims are necessarily inflated, though we'll get into that. It's that the underlying mechanisms genuinely touch multiple systems throughout the body. Mineral transport, cellular energy production, hormone physiology, even your connective tissues. These aren't marketing angles. This is the actual reflection of the active chemical compounds and what they're actually doing. So let's walk through these systems one at a time so we understand them, starting with the one that has the most clinical evidence behind it. Here's the piece that gets talked about a lot, but rarely explained clearly. When people say that Shilajit supports testosterone, what they actually mean is that it showed up in a clinical trial, and that is true, but the mechanism behind it is more interesting than that headline alone. The hallmark randomized double-blind clinical control trial looked at healthy men between the ages of 45 and 55. And they were taking 250 milligrams of purified Shilajit twice a day. And they did this for 90 days. What they found was a statistically significant increase in total testosterone, free testosterone, and DHEA sulfate compared to the placebo group. They also found that LH and FSH, which are the signals that your brain sends to control these hormones. What this means is that the effect wasn't coming from some kind of master hormonal override higher up in the system. The body's own signaling stayed intact, which is huge when we talk about hormone support. What changed was the downstream output, which suggests that Shilajit is supporting the environment that testosterone production requires rather than forcing a hormonal response from the outside. And by the way, if you're one who likes the research, I've included a few of the research articles that I used to back up this particular video. They include my perspective and some great short takeaways as well. So check that out if you're interested. It's in the pinned comment in the description below. And this is where a functional medicine lens adds something that these headlines miss altogether. Testosterone production is an energy-intensive process. The cells responsible for producing it are highly dependent on your little cellular engines or your mitochondria and antioxidant protection as well, because oxidative stress, or that browning of an apple that takes place through our energy production directly impairs their output. Fulvic acid is also known to help deliver zinc and magnesium, two incredibly important minerals for testosterone production, efficiently into cells. And both of those are involved directly in the hormone synthesis process. So the testosterone support story and the mitochondrial support story aren't technically separate claims here. They're the same mechanism described from two different angles that are supporting overall health. So next, let's talk about the mitochondrial mechanism a little bit more. This is one of my favorite topics. This is the part that most supplement conversations don't really get to, and I think it's one of the most important pieces for understanding whether or not Shilajit is actually relevant to you and whether or not it's going to work when you try it. Your mitochondria are the tiny structures inside your cells that are responsible for producing your energy in the form of ATP. This is your body's primary source of energy across multiple systems for every cell of the body. Everything runs on it: muscle contraction, cognitive function, creating your hormones, and even your immune system integrity. So when mitochondrial energy efficiency drops, many people might describe things like energy loss, brain fog, low physical capacity, and even hormonal shifts as a cluster rather than just isolated symptoms. And it's because everything's connected. The DBPs that we talked about earlier as one of the main active ingredients in Shilajit function as supplemental electron carriers. And what this basically means is we're able to more efficiently create energy, or ATP. Electrons need to be moving efficiently for this to take place. And the DBPs also work alongside other nutrients like CoQ10, your body's primary electron carrier, to stabilize that process and to reduce what researchers call electron leakage. This is basically what makes energy production less efficient at the cellular level. A 2019 randomized controlled trial from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln tested this from a performance angle. Recreationally active men were taking either 250 milligrams, 500 milligrams, or a placebo of purified Shilajit daily for 8 weeks total. And I want to highlight these trials. This one was 8 weeks, the previous one was 9. Don't give up before you reach those points. The group that was taking 500 milligrams showed significantly better retention of maximal muscle strength throughout this process after fatiguing exercises compared to the placebo group. The researchers pointed to this mechanism of mitochondrial efficiency and ATP efficiency under stress as the most likely mechanism. And here's what I noticed personally after my own trial of Shilajit. The shift wasn't like flipping a switch for me. It was more like a dial that was kind of turning slowly in my efficiency. Afternoon energy dips were definitely less prominent. Output in my physical training, I lift weights, I do some regular cardio, was way more consistent, and I felt like my recovery was a lot faster as well. Nothing in and of itself was dramatic, but it was gradual and apparent across multiple areas. And that experience really did match this proposed mechanism. This isn't stimulant territory. You're not borrowing energy from somewhere else or getting it externally. You're improving the efficiency of how your cells actually make energy from the inside out. That research summary, by the way, has a breakdown of both of the studies I've mentioned so far. It's all laid out in plain language, so it's worth grabbing if you'd like to go a little bit deeper. The link's below. So here's the piece where the I tried it for 2 weeks format really skips the conversation entirely. And I think it's the most honest thing I can tell you about this compound. Whether Shilajit works for you or not is primarily terrain dependent. And what I mean by that, and leveraging some of the information from the research studies, is that it shows that the most meaningful results were conducted in people who were otherwise reasonably healthy already. No significant metabolic dysfunction, no major stress physiology, dysregulation, and no notable nutrient depletion either. They were working from a more stable baseline, and that's incredibly important here. In functional medicine, we pay very close attention to what we think of as safety signals broadly, the sum of your inputs that your body's receiving both internally and from your environment. So we're looking at things like sleep quality, blood sugar balance, stress load, movement, nutrition status, of course. When those safety signals are all present, your mitochondria also have the permission to expand output and to run more efficiently. When these safety signals are more absent, they tend to shift into a more conservation-based posture, regardless of what things you're taking in supplemental form. So Shilajit tends to express itself most clearly when your lifestyle foundations are already supporting and sending your body and your mitochondria those safety signals. So if you've tried Shilajit and felt nothing, or really any supplement, that's a question worth sitting with and maybe asking some deeper follow-up questions. Not whether or not the compound works or not, but what else in your terrain might be competing with that particular safety signal. And with many supplement conversations, they deserve a bit of attention on the form, because I personally used a pure resin in my trial, and I think the difference is worth understanding. Resin is the least processed version of Shilajit, and it preserves the fullest bioactive profile, according to the research, including the DBPs, which are heat sensitive, so many preparation methods can degrade those active ingredients. The resin also tends to have higher concentrations of the fulvic acid, which is also lost to powders or capsules. A high quality and standardized capsule can go a long way, especially if you find it in a more standardized form, to at least 50% fulvic acid. I know it's quite a detail, and also verified DBP content. This is a reasonable thing to look for in a supplement that should be published if it's available. Just always remember, because there are a lot of cheap knockoffs out there, that the form does affect what you're actually getting. Here's another sourcing piece that goes way deeper than fake reviews and questionable sellers and all that jazz. A 2024 comprehensive review was published, and it confirmed that Shilajit contains about 65 heavy metals in its most natural state, including potentially toxic ones like lead, arsenic, and even cadmium. In properly purified products, the levels should fall below the limits that are set by the World Health Organization and the FDA. The practical takeaway here is quite simple. Look for a certification of analysis through a third-party tester when it comes to Shilajit, and it will look at these common insults that could cause more harm than good, and the FDA, including the heavy metals. If a brand won't or can't provide it, then that's your answer there as well. So back to the original question, does Shilajit actually work? Based on the research, my personal experience with it, I believe that it can. And the conditions under which it does are more specific than the marketing actually suggests. We have some really compelling mechanisms. Whether it's the testosterone story, the mitochondrial story, or simply just repleting your mineral status, Shilajit can offer some positive benefits when it's in a standardized, controlled form. Now, we talked about how Shilajit's mechanism runs through mitochondrial efficiency, but that raises a deeper question for many people. What actually causes mitochondria to become inefficient in the first place? And why does that happen even in people who are doing a lot of the right things? That's what this video over here goes over specifically, how chronic stress signals at the cellular level can quietly shift your mitochondria out of energy production mode, and why that pattern tends to show up long before any standard labs catch it. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.